I found out how my parents met and I need help. I'm back home for the week due to national holiday and I was going through some old photo albums. I found a picture of my mom aged around 8 to 10 and some dude who looked just like my dad. I took the picture to her and she confessed everything. It turns out the guy in the photo is my dad's older brother who was friends with my grandparents. My parents have known each other since my mom was 6 and my dad was 18. The story that they tell everyone is that they met when my mom was 18 and my dad was 29 at a party hosted by a mutual acquaintance. They started dating a few months later, got married when my mom was 25 and had me a few years after that. The truth is that they actually started dating when my mom turned 15 and because of this, her parents kicked her out of the house and cut contact with her. That means that my dad was 27 years old when he started dating her. We're in a Western country in Europe and we're all white. Growing up, my parents seemed to have a very healthy relationship, both had careers and my mom isn't financially dependent on him. I'm not close to my uncle or my paternal grandparents, but I'm considering giving them a call. I am so disgusted with everyone involved, but especially my dad. How can I look at him in the eye again knowing he probably grew my mom at a very young age? How do you even find someone you knew as a child attractive? Part 2 of how I found out how my parents met and I need help. The first thing I did was have a talk with my mom. I waited until my dad left the house, then we both sat down and had a really good talk. I asked her if she was safe, if she was happy, and if she felt loved and cared for in their relationship. She said she does to all of that. Then I asked her if, should things go wrong, she would have the money and means to get out of the relationship. She said she does. I expressed my concern about how the relationship started. She said she understood if I needed time to process it and if I had any questions, she would answer them honestly. After my dad got home, I talked to him. I'm still having trouble with the idea of him and who I found out he is. I told him that I don't think our relationship would ever be the same again and he said he understood. I asked him if he had any attraction towards children or teenagers and he said he doesn't. He said my mom was a kindred spirit sort of love. Last thing I did was give my uncle a call. He lives in a different country and we talked for a bit. He said I'm welcome to come visit any time and I might take him up on that. He was there for my dad through the beginning of the relationship, so I'll get some outside perspective. As for my grandparents, my mom said that her and my grandparents had mended their relationship a couple years before I was born. Storytime about how one best friend saved me from the other. The school I went to was a public school that never cared or paid attention to things that went on unless it was brought up to the school board directly. It was sophomore year of high school and I had class with both my girl and boy best friend. The girl's name is Aspen and the guy's name is Nick. Since our teacher didn't care, all three of us picked our seats together. I sat in the middle between Nick and Aspen. Nick and I had known each other since kindergarten, so I was pretty comfortable with his company. I never thought anything of it when he leaned his head on my shoulder or squished my face with his hands. However, about halfway through the year, things started to take a turn. During class, Nick would put his hands on my thighs or he'd lean on me and wrap his arms around my waist. This started to make me feel uncomfortable. We were seated in the back of the class, so no one noticed him making me uncomfortable except Aspen, who had no idea what was happening because I never alarmed her of it. I didn't say anything because part of me thought I was overreacting. After all, he was my best friend. One day, the class was empty because it was a free day, so we could all just hang out in the classroom or the commons. The teacher was God knows where and Aspen had left to go print something for a different class in the printing room. I was left alone in the back of the classroom with Nick. For a few minutes, things were fine. I knew that Aspen would be back, so I just read my book. Then out of nowhere, I saw Nick stand up and shut the classroom door. Part 2 of how one best friend saved me from the other. I was scared when Nick shut the classroom door, but I tried to ignore him and pretended to keep reading my book. I quickly dialed Aspen's number on my phone and slipped the phone into my pocket. Before long, Nick got impatient with me and ordered me to take off my shirt. I told him no, and that's when he grabbed a fistful of my hair and tried to do it himself. After a minute of struggling with him, Aspen busted through the classroom door with one of our school guidance counselors. Turns out she hadn't really gone to the print room. She had noticed Nick touching me inappropriately and making me uncomfortable the previous day, so she went to the guidance counselor to get help. When I dialed her number, she was trying to convince the counselor, and when she realized what was happening, she put the phone on speaker to prove that I was in an unsafe situation. The counselor took Nick away, and later I found out that 7 other girls had come forward about him. They all said that he was harassing them, but since the school had no evidence, they couldn't expel him before. However, since the school counselor heard what was going on when Aspen put the phone on speaker during his attack on me, they were able to finally expel him. I'll always be thankful to Aspen for trying to help me when I felt like I couldn't do anything. Storytime about the ghost that follows me. When I was in my teens, my cousin and best friend made a Ouija board. I was skeptical whether it worked or not, but agreed to try it out with her. We get everything set up and my cousin starts asking the board questions. It starts answering and saying weird things that my cousin didn't even know about my life. Some of my deepest and darkest secrets were coming out of that thing. I started to panic and I told my cousin that I wanted to stop. We said our goodbyes and closed it up. I thought that was the end of it, but that night, we started hearing footsteps in her room. This was something that neither of us had experienced in that room ever. When I went home, the footsteps followed me and continued to happen to my childhood home. When I told my parents, my dad chalked it up to the floor settling after we laid new flooring in the previous years. Then we moved into a new home that had been converted from a garage to a business to a home by my family. I mention this because 1, no one had clearly ever lived there, and 2, the floors under the carpet and laminate were cement. However, the laminate would still creak as if a full-grown adult was walking on it. Shortly after, I moved into my ex's apartment and same thing. The footsteps again, but this time, shadows started appearing. It had gotten so bad that my best friend and roommate, who's a major skeptic, didn't want to be there alone. I didn't think it could get any worse, but it did. Part 2 of the ghost that follows me. I eventually moved out of the apartment. I moved in with my mother and sister in a different city. Her duplex went from no paranormal activity to an insane amount in just a few days. They would feel hot breaths on their face at night when they slept. My aunt started hearing giggling in a different room when she was alone, and I even heard someone say in an eerily tone, "Mommy," at 3 in the morning once. However, the craziest part is that the duplex mysteriously caught fire. When the fire department came and did their investigation, they had no explanation as to how the fire started or what caused it. After that, we moved into a new modular home who only had one previous owner. The footsteps started again. I found a pretty doll at an antique store, and eventually the doll started to move around on its own. There were times I caught it wave at me or move its head. It got to the point that I had to hide it away because it moved so much and it scared me so badly. I recently moved into an apartment in my hometown and the footsteps are here now. Things keep getting moved around too. I'm seeing the shadows again and it feels like I'll never be free of this thing. I don't know what to do, but I'm scared and terrified it'll always follow me. My boyfriend and I have been together for 5 years. We went to the same university, and after graduation, I started my catering business in our hometown. He got into computer systems and we've both worked hard towards our careers. Everything seemed to be going great for us when my boyfriend came home one day and told me that he got a promotion. I was excited for him until he said that the position was in another state. He told me the pay is almost triple what he's making now and he doesn't feel like he could pass it up. However, I've worked hard the last few years on my catering business in this city. I've got a ton of big clients who regularly order and business is booming for me. Obviously, I'm going to have doubts about moving to another state and starting from scratch. This would also put me in a financially stressful situation as my income would plummet until I planted roots in a new state with new clientele. I told him I wasn't sure if I'm comfortable moving and how it would impact my business. He assured me that he would take care of everything for us, including all the bills and any extra spending costs I needed for myself or my business. This sounded slightly better, but I was still torn. Over the last 5 years, we've talked a few times about the future, and he knows that I want more of a commitment eventually, but I've never tried to force him into it. That's when I brought up the topic of marriage and told him that I like some sort of commitment if I'm going to uproot my life for him. However, he didn't react well to this and things got intense. I told my boyfriend that I needed some sort of commitment to start from scratch in another state. I explained to him how big of a change this would be for me and my business. This is when I mentioned the topic of marriage. I asked him that if I was to show him my commitment to his career with this move, how he would feel about committing to me with what I wanted. I told him I wouldn't rush him into marriage, but I would want the promise of it. He told me that he didn't feel comfortable with marriage and that he wasn't interested in it. That's when he said that the promise of taking care of us and my business costs should be enough for me to make the commitment to move. I disagreed because there's no telling how my business would do in another location, and it's taken me years to build it up to what it is now. We got into a heated argument and decided that we both need time to figure this out. I talked to my mom and sister about it, who sided with him, saying that the financial commitment he made to my business to start over is enough. However, now that I've had a few days to think, I'm wondering if he'll ever want to get married. Marriage is important to me, and he's known this early on in our relationship. He always told me that it would come in its own time, but it's been 5 years and I feel like he's not even remotely thinking about it. I'm torn and I don't know what to do. Am I wrong for not wanting to uproot my life and business for him without the commitment of marriage? It was 1978 when a young girl named Mary Vincent ran away from home. Her parents were getting divorced, but she loved to dance and she wanted to pursue her career in LA as a dancer. So she's hitchhiking and holding a sign that says heading south, and hitchhiking at this time was pretty normal. Everyone would do it when a man named Lawrence Singleton picks her up. This man was much older and gave off grandpa vibes, and Mary felt pretty comfortable with him, so she went ahead and took a nap. When she woke up, she realized that they were going the wrong way and corrected him, but he just made excuses and kept going. When Singleton stops for a bathroom break, Mary realizes she might have to make a getaway, but as soon as she leaves the car, everything goes black. Singleton had whacked Mary over the head with a sledgehammer. When she wakes up, she realizes that she's tied up and in the back of his van. Over the next night, he repeatedly assaults her. By the next morning, Mary is begging to be set free. That's when he says, "You want to be set free? I'll set you free." Then he grabs his axe and does the unthinkable. After Singleton tells Mary he's going to set her free, he goes up to her and uses his axe to chop off both of her forearms. Then he takes her body and throws it over a 30-foot cliff, leaving her for dead as he drives away. As Mary slips in and out of consciousness, she thinks about Singleton's future victims. She finds the will to survive and climbs the mountain without her arms. She's wandering without any clothes and holding her arms up to prevent further bleeding when a car comes by. They rush her to the hospital and by a miracle, she survives. Singleton is then caught and arrested. Mary then testifies against him in court, telling everyone the unspeakable things that he did to her. Due to the leniency of the laws back then, he only got 14 years. Then he only served 8 and got out for good behavior. 9 years later, he killed another woman named Roxanne Hayes by stabbing her to death. Vincent showed up once again to testify against him, and this time he got the death penalty. However, he passed away in 2001 from cancer. Mary became an artist, had a family, and went on to share her story with others. When I was around 13, my friend Sally and I were having a sleepover. I met her in the beginning of my first year at a new school. She was older than the other kids in our grade and was considered one of the popular kids, which is what I think drew me to her at first. It was your typical Friday night. We carpooled to her family's apartment after school. Her family was pretty religious and wouldn't let us watch horror movies, so we ended up watching Hunger Games instead. After the movie, Sally and I were hanging out in a room, listening to music and giving each other makeovers. By the end of it, we were looking much older than what we really were. Sally wasn't the most positive influence. Despite being my bestie at the time, she was manipulative and got off on putting me down. She also had a habit of talking to men online and lying about her age. She showed me some texts between her and a guy that she was talking to, which mostly consisted of him trying to convince her to meet up with him and the usual online creep stuff. According to him, he was 19. However, looking at the picture that he sent, this man was clearly at least 40 and looked like he lived in his mother's basement. Suddenly, we got a call from him. Sally answered without hesitation and I heard him say, "You're so pretty, why don't you come meet me?" Sally said she couldn't because she was spending the night with her friend. This sparked his interest. That's when he proceeded to try and ask us both to meet him. Sally, lacking any common sense, said yes. Part 2 of why you shouldn't sneak out. She planned for us to sneak out and walk 15 blocks to meet this creep in a deserted McDonald's parking lot. I didn't want to go, but Sally adamantly pleaded, saying that she didn't feel safe going by herself, so I agreed. We took our phones and I stuffed a kitchen knife in my bra in case something went wrong. The route we took was dark and deserted. When we got to the parking lot, we saw a beat-up Toyota Corolla. From what I could tell, there was more than one person inside. The man from the picture got out and left the door open behind him as he approached us. I turned on my flash to see and I could tell he was on something. His eyes were so wide they looked like they were about to pop out of his head. I suddenly became conscious of how big he was. He was about 6'2" and around 280 pounds. Sally and I were both significantly smaller than him. That's when he reached down and grabbed Sally by the arm. His friends got out of the car and he invited us back to the car for booze and drugs. I quickly took my knife out and when he saw it, he released her. I pulled Sally by the arm and ran faster than I ever had in my life. When we got to her home, we locked the doors, closed the blinds, and didn't sleep all night as we peeked out the window in case they followed us. To our dismay, this same Toyota was circling around her apartment building not once, not twice, but 3 times. After this, Sally and I stopped talking because she was mad at me for ruining her night. However, I think it was for the best. My boyfriend and I have been dating for over 3 years. His birthday was coming up and I wanted it to be special. I decided to pick out a day where I went to the mall and got things that I thought he'd like and put it all together as a big present. While I was there, I ran into a friend of his named Matt. I told Matt what I was planning and since he was his close friend, I asked him if he'd be willing to help me pick out some things. Matt of course agreed, so we hit up some shops to find things that we both thought my boyfriend would really like. My boyfriend and I had recently moved in together and I knew that he was working, but his job's hours are always changing, so I didn't know when he'd get home. I didn't want him to catch me red-handed with all of the things before I hid them, so I asked him what he was doing and when he'd be home. That's when he told me that he was already off work and hanging out with Matt at the bars. This immediately stopped me in my tracks because there was no way he'd be hanging out with him since Matt was just a few feet away from me in the store. When I told Matt, he was confused too because he was never asked by my boyfriend to hang out at the bar. We have a very trusting relationship, so normally I'd believe him, but in this case I knew that it was a lie. I wasn't sure what to do because he's never lied to me before, or at least I've never caught him in a lie like this. That's when I decided to go home and wait for him. Part 2 of how my boyfriend lied to me about who he was with. When my boyfriend got home, he acted completely normal. I asked him how it was hanging out with Matt at the bar. He told me about his day and told me how him and Matt just grabbed a few drinks nonchalantly. This made me angry because I knew he was lying, but I wasn't sure how to bring up the truth. I also didn't know how to tell him that I was hanging out with Matt without bringing up that I was also shopping for his birthday present. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt and let it be. However, when we were laying in bed later that night, I couldn't take it anymore and confronted him. I told him I ran into Matt at the mall when he texted me, so I know it wasn't Matt who he was hanging out with. He quickly got frazzled and I could tell he was trying not to tell me something. However, this only made me more curious. Finally, he told me to wait a minute and he left the room. When he came back, I sat up and he came to my side of the bed. He took out a box from behind his back and got on one knee. My eyes widened. He confessed that he was out ring shopping for me because he knew I was the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. We had a weekend getaway planned for his birthday and he was going to propose to me on one of the days we were there. I was shocked. Of course I said yes and tackled him in a big hug. We went on our trip together and it was amazing. Now it's a funny story that we tell everyone. Story time about how my boyfriend gave me sleeping pills before his boys' night out. I had been dating my boyfriend for a year and we always had a pretty trusting relationship. One weekend, he was going to have a boys' night out with his friends and I was going to stay home. However, earlier in the day, we had gone into an argument about how he never checks his phone while he's out or replies to my text to check in. He said he shouldn't have to check in with me while he's out and I disagreed because I just want to make sure that he's okay. Fast forward to later that night when he's getting ready, I told him that even though we're fighting, I still expect him to keep in touch with me. He agrees this time without putting up a fight and asks me if I want to have a drink with him before he goes. He makes us some cocktails and we drink them together while we wait for his friends to come pick him up. When his friends get there, he kisses me goodbye and leaves. Not even half an hour later, I'm knocked out cold. I remember waking up once just for a second to use the bathroom, but then knocking out again. In the morning when I woke up, he was asleep next to me and I was really confused as to why I slept so much when I wasn't even tired. When my boyfriend woke up, he mentioned how nice it was that I hadn't messaged him and how I must have slept through the night after those cocktails. This raised some red flags and I quickly questioned him about what was in the cocktails. At first, he called me crazy and told me that he didn't do anything to them. However, after about 20 minutes of accusing him, he finally confessed. Part 2, why you should be careful who you befriend. Once I questioned Joe, he confessed saying that it was because he wanted to make sure I was safe. I felt betrayed and creeped out. He apologized and asked for forgiveness. I told him I didn't want to be friends with him anymore. That's when he got angry and left. The next 2 to 3 days, he didn't come to school. My friends told me that he harassed him for snitching on him. When he came back to school, we pretended like we didn't know each other. On my walk home that day, I heard Joe calling my name in a low and unfamiliar tone, but he was nowhere to be seen. I don't know why, but my gut told me to run as fast as I could. I listened to it and sprinted all the way home. I made sure every door and window was locked. I was convinced that I was being paranoid at this point. Then my phone screen lit up. I looked to see many missed calls from Joe. Then I heard my name being called again. I looked up to see Joe in the front of my house, banging on the door. Everything went completely silent after 5 minutes, which felt like an eternity. The last words I heard from him was, "You'll always be my best friend." This issue was brought up to the school and Joe never showed up again. 4 years have passed since then, and just a few days ago, I got a couple friend requests on my social media accounts. It was him. I blocked him and changed all my social media names into something else. I don't live in that same town anymore, or even the same country. However, I can't help but to feel like the scared 18-year-old me again. I'm not the friendly person I once was, and I've become cautious around other people. This is why you should be careful who you befriend. When I was in junior high, I was a friendly and curious person. 1 month into the fall semester, we got a new transfer student. He was seated behind me and his name was Joe. I introduced myself to him, trying to ease attention. I showed him what we learned so far and helped him to look over his class schedule. We had 2 classes and lunch together. Naturally, we got to know each other and became friends. He was a quiet kid but talked a lot around me, so I assumed he was just comfortable with me. I made it clear to him that we were just friends and he agreed, so I brought him around my friends and we all started to hang out. Fast forward to spring break, I told Joe that I was going out of town with my family. He seemed disappointed we couldn't spend spring break together but understood. However, while on spring break, I ran into Joe at a restaurant. I didn't tell him where I was going, so I thought to myself, wow, what a coincidence. He said he was visiting family in the same town and I believed him. Then in senior year, Joe and I were hanging out at least 3 times a week. I noticed it was too much and I wanted to make time for my other friends as well. That's when things started to change. I ran into Joe, or should I say saw him in the corner of my eye when I spent time with someone else over myself. He started to become obsessive and clingy. The first few times I didn't think much of it. However, it all became clear when I questioned him and he said that he accidentally followed me. Part 2 of the best thing I saw while working in a restaurant. This guy handed me his card as well and said, "Yeah, I'm gonna split that tab, so really guys, go wild, you're American heroes." They both empathetically told him no, they're not heroes, but this guy cut him off saying, "Oh please, I get overwhelmed playing Call of Duty. You're heroes and I'm glad to thank you for it." So they started ordering and the girl knew just what she wanted. Hank asked how much our steak and rice platter special would cost. Older bow tie dude called him not to tell him the prices and get him whatever he wants. He came up and said, "Son, no one can put a price on your sacrifice." Call of Duty guy splitting the tab chimed in, "The meat that we're giving you is a lot less valuable than the meat you gave up for us." His friend elbowed him to shut up, horrified, but it got a belly laugh out of Hank. Throughout this, no one noticed not only had Hank lost his hand, but also his leg. His pants covered and he's got too much honor to bring it up. By now, the kitchen got a whiff of what was happening and loaded them up real good. This lady was so moved that she paid for Old Man Bow Tie and Call of Duty's meals. It was a domino effect. The owner was so disturbed that 2 veterans had struggled to pay for their meals. He instituted a military gets the special free day of the week even though we've been hemorrhaging money since the pandemic closures and keeping the doors open on a week-to-week basis. Hank told all of his veteran friends and they've been coming in with their families. It's been great for business. Story time about the best thing I saw while working in a restaurant. We've got a veteran who comes in on the regular named Hank. Hank lost his leg and hand in Iraq. When seeing this, people will often pick up his tab when he's in here, but he never feels like it's deserved, so he tries to lay low. He wears long pants to cover his prosthetic leg and doesn't wear anything to show off his veteran status. He doesn't like attention and it's clear he doesn't feel special treatment is deserved. So obviously we shut down because of COVID. We reopened when our state did, but after a week of indoor dining, the owner decided to go back to delivery and takeout for everyone's safety. Thankfully, business is still booming. I don't know the specifics of Hank's situation, but I think he lost his job sometime during the shutdown. Before COVID, we'd see him at least once a month, but this was the first time we'd seen him since we reopened. To make matters worse, he would easily put away 6 tacos or a whole chicken plus sides and plenty of beer when he'd come in, but this time he just ordered a small burrito and a water. He didn't mention the different order though, just said how excited he was to come through again and looking forward to it all week. We put in his order while I went to go get him paid up. However, his card declined. I started to tell him, but he could see it on the screen and went, "Shit." Shame and panic washed over his face as I tried running it again and again when he gave me another card that declined. Meanwhile, it was the height of lunch rush and the line was getting longer, so people were peering to see what was taking so long. After running Hank's cards a few times, all of his cards declined. He started saying, "Hey, you know what? Did you actually make the thing yet?" But then the bag came out with his name unmistakably on it. He started digging around his pockets for cash and came up with $5.25. The meal was $7. I told him, "Don't worry about it. You'll get us next time." Knowing how embarrassed he got when people tried to cover him for a good reason, being a veteran, and not wanting to pile on by being forward that I was covering him for a not so great reason, hard times. However, he wasn't entertaining the idea of taking food without paying it in full. Finally, without making eye contact with us, he said, No, it's okay. I'm just gonna go to my place and get some more cash." However, I knew that look on his face and the tone in his voice. There was no more to go get. It's a look and tone I've used myself and seen from others more times than I wish I had. I wanted to insist he take the food, but I wasn't sure which was worse. To force food on him and risk damaging his dignity, or to let him save face but go without the lunch he's been looking so forward to. Before I could decide, the girl behind him, who had been texting for most of our transaction, had just begun to tune in and caught the last bit. She asked, "Hey, what's the difference on what he owes?" I said, $2. She went in her purse and handed it right to me. Hank started to try and hand it back to her, telling her it wasn't necessary, but she cut him off. She cut him off by saying, No, it's $2. We've all been there. Enjoy your lunch." As he finally gave in and went to put her money on the counter, she noticed his prosthetic hand. She did a double take and said, "Actually, no, you know what? Let me get the whole thing. Give him his money back." Then went in her purse and got the rest. He tried to stop her from doing it, but she replied, "Listen, I hope I'm not being presumptuous, but you're a veteran, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, that's what I thought. I served 2 hours in Afghanistan. There's a guy walking around on false legs out there who's the reason I'm walking around at all. So please, allow me to do this and don't think twice about it. I tell you to just get anything you want off the menu if times weren't so tight for me right now too." At this point, an older guy with a bow tie came up and announced, "I couldn't help but overhear. Put both their tabs on me, get them anything they want, and then get them some more." Thank you both for your service. Hank was getting pretty emotional at this point, but even still, they both started to vigorously protest to the man that he didn't need to do that because it was their job and they both signed up for it. Bowtie Guy wouldn't hear it. He must have had his own story because he got red in the face and blinked back tears but stayed silent. He left his credit card with me and went back to his spot in line. That's when another guy stepped up to the register. Part 2. My boyfriend gave me sleeping pills before his boys' night out. After I accused my boyfriend of messing with the cocktails, he admitted to putting a couple Benadryl in my drink. This, mixed with the alcohol, is what made me extremely sleepy and caused me to knock out for the whole night. I was furious when he said it. He clearly didn't see a problem with it and even made a joke about how he should do it more often when he doesn't want me pestering him. I freaked out at him and told him that what he did was not only wrong, but could also be a crime. I think this scared him a bit because he quickly started apologizing and promising to never do it again. Obviously, I'm not stupid and I wasn't going to stay with someone who would do that to me. I quickly called my family who came rushing over. I packed my things and my brothers kept my now ex in the other room and threatening him not to come around me. I got all my things together with my mom and my sister and left him that very day. He wouldn't stop blowing up my phone with apologies and sending sorry gifts to my work. I had to block his number and threaten him with a restraining order if he ever tried to talk to me again. I was horrified that someone would go to those lengths and I couldn't trust him after this. He even tried to get his family to text me to get back together with him, but when I told them why we broke up, they were shocked too. They apologized profusely on his behalf and told me to stay safe.